shouldn't be contagious anymore, but I'm going to try and keep my distance. And I'm going to keep my mask on, of course. Just,
Yeah.
doing our best to be as healthy as we can.
How's everybody else feeling?
Pretty good. I mean, I was never very sick. So I would never have thought to have been tested. Hannah seems to have gotten it first.
That was her second time having it, right?
Yeah. Had some pretty serious chest congestion, and she went to the doctor, and they were like, yeah, you have an upper respiratory infection, and they gave her some medicine, sent her home. But then Rebecca got some chest congestion. She went in, they tested her, and she tested positive. We're like, what?
Yeah,
So then we tested everybody, and everybody came back positive except for Angela and Cecily. So I had for 4 days, a dry cough and a sore throat. I didn't have any head congestion. I didn't have a runny nose. I didn't have anything in my chest. I didn't have anything. Just a dry cough and a little bit of a sore throat. And I mean a little bit of a sore throat. But we got the Paxlovid. It's the new antiviral. They say it's a game changer, but I guess so.
At what point does that need to get administered?
I think if you can do it within, I think it's 3 days, 72 hours of your first symptom, then, I mean, they're saying it's as effective a treatment as the vaccine is preventative.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I'm not so sure I didn't have it when they thought I had the flu, because like, I think I think 'cause I was just doing the at-home kits, because at that time it was during the time when it was bad. And you couldn't get in anywhere for like days at a time. And I know like those, like if your viral load wasn't enough, like it wouldn't register as positive, but I had like every.
Yeah,
and I was
everything
super
is so
sick.
much better now. Like, at-home test, every U.S. citizen can get 8 at-home tests per month.
Yeah.
Free of charge.
Yeah, we got them for free the first time, but we've never had to use them, so we have a whole
Yeah,
stock of them now.
Right. So, and you can get that many per month.
That's crazy.
The later variants of the disease are so much less severe than the early ones. The vaccines, of course, are out.
Yep.
Now the therapeutics that they have, like this Paxlovid I was on, are real effective. So
Yeah.
you really have mastered it.
Yeah.
I actually heard Fauci had said today that we can no longer say we're in a pandemic, that we are post-pandemic stage.
Yeah, I saw that headline.
Yeah. And he seems to be a rather cautious fellow, so
Yeah.
if he's saying we're post-pandemic, other people have been saying it for a long time.
Yeah, I think it'll be now just like the flu. It'll have its like seasons every year.
Yeah, and for the vast majority of folks, it won't be too severe. I mean, I don't want to get the flu. Don't get me wrong. But
And I'm assuming as we all start to build more immunity to it too, like just like any other disease.
yeah,
like,
exactly. Yeah, so we've come through a hard time, but
Well, it's good to know that it didn't affect Rebecca too bad.
not at all, really. I mean, she was sick, like a bad
Yeah.
chest cold, head cold for maybe 3 or 4 days. But she wasn't anywhere near needing to be like hospitalized. Really. And she was the quickest to test negative. I think part of her issue was, well, when it first came around, it was a more severe issue, right?
Yeah.
And the thing with her was she was particularly susceptible to getting it. She wasn't particularly susceptible to having super negative effects from it, right? So it was like, if it came near her, she was going to catch it. But even some of the drugs that she was on for other things were drugs that early on they were using to treat it. So the thought was, if we keep her from getting it, great, but if she does get it, hopefully it won't be too severe. And that's how it turned out.
Good.
How's Benny
certainly
doing?
now, we're so much later. Benny?
Yeah.
She is so much fun.
It's been a while since you've had
A puppy?
she's a puppy, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
11 years.
okay, now I get the,
So
got
we have-
another dog.
Sorry, I went very different path here.
So, about a month-ish, our old Schnauzer Poodle mix, he had renal failure, and then he had a tumor in his snout, and he would have been 15 in June,
Oh, wow, okay.
so he's pretty old for his breed. Anyway, I mean, think about it, like, our youngest girls are 13, 11, and 10. Well, he was 14, so
Yeah.
he's been in the family a long time.
Yeah.
So he's gone to heaven, waiting the resurrection. But Sunday, we got little Beignet. We call her Benny. Sometimes we just call her B. And she's, I don't know how old she is, 8 weeks, 9 weeks young. Little miniature poodle.
Oh.
She's real cute. She has a real good demeanor. She's,
Puppy.
lots of energy, and she pesters the older dog a lot. And she can't keep her balance still.
No.
Like, every day she's doing better, though. At first, sometimes poodles, they like to sit up kind of straight. I don't know if you've ever seen them. Real proper when they sit up.
Yeah.
So she was already trying to do that, but if she sat up too fast, she lost her balance and tipped backwards. It's real funny to watch, yeah. So now she's getting to where she can sit up without falling over. So there's a plus.
Do you have to crate her and stuff like that?
Well, we do. I mean, that's what we know, and there
Yeah.
might be a better way to train them,
I think that sounds
but
good.
she's learning,
Oh,
and she's got the older one to teach her.
Yeah.
What's up?
Hey, friends.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Good to see
Something,
you.
something to entertain the kids too, I'm sure. Lots of energy.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, she's entertaining everyone except for the older dog, who does not seem to be overly entertained.
Oh, the new puppy.
The new puppy, yeah.
How did you not get a boy dog? I mean, all those girls,
I know,
and even
man.
the dogs are.
I don't know. All we got is girls. That's all we know.
It's kind of like our house. We got a dog and it's a boy.
There you go.
Sam kind of evens us out a little bit. It's about the size of
All the littles.
all the littles.
Yeah,
We're girl heavy right now.
gotcha. So, it's good to be back with you. I feel like I've been gone a while.
Everybody feeling better?
Yeah, I think, so Hannah had a little bit of a relapse. Of course, she had kind of that she had COVID back when it was more serious, and had some long COVID issues. So she got it this time as well, and she had some congestion, but I thought she was feeling better, and then it seems like she had a little bit of a relapse. Everyone else seems to be fine.
Good.
And, I had a little bit of I'm telling them, I had a little bit of a dry cough, a little bit of a sore throat. Like I would never have been tested had, one of them tested and tested positive, shocked us, and so of course we tested everybody. And we're like, what is that? This can't be that, but it was. And
Thank you, Landon.
a little loud for them, I guess. It's not exactly the direction you thought. If one group of the two is going to be too loud for the other.
I think you did that last
Maybe
week.
Miss Patty said that they're about to get loud, so maybe they should shut the door.
Oh, there you go. It's preemptive.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. Well, let's have a word of prayer, and we'll get started. Chronicles, man. Who shows up for a Bible study on Chronicles? Like that's the section of the Bible. For those of you who grew up doing those devotionals where you read the Bible through in a year, those days you're stuck on Chronicles, man, are tough. There's just too many genealogies, right? So-and-so begat so-and-so, begat so-and-so, begat so-and-so. And if you get 2 or 3 genealogies in a row, that's your whole devotion that day. So that could be tough. Luckily, in the Hebrew Bible, Chronicles is just one long scroll. And in the video, they do 1st and 2nd Chronicles in 6 minutes. So, thank God.
So we're gonna spend the rest of the time reading the begats,
No.
one at a time?
So,
Pronounce all the names.
in terms of the prayer request that I know of, you know, Ted Smith's brother passed away, his older brother. He had pancreatic cancer. His name was David. And then he also requested prayer for his daughter, Jennifer.
Bless you.
Then we have been praying more often on lately, for Gretchen's dad.
Yeah.
And so I don't know the latest.
He, it's kind of a slow roll. He's probably gonna have some appointments throughout the summer, and then maybe a surgery towards the end of summer.
Okay.
So it may, yeah, it's probably gonna be kind of a bit of a slow
So
roll.
we should just keep praying.
Yeah, it's nothing critical. It's just it was a bit of a shock for all of us, but nothing like, you know, he's gonna undergo treatment like every week or something crazy like that.
Okay.
Like he asked his doctor if he could go to Puerto Rico in June because he already had it planned, and they were like, yeah, that's fine. So
Okay.
we're thinking that end of summer he'll probably have some surgery. So it's prostate cancer.
Oh.
So
Gotcha.
not like there's like different stages that he described. But basically, he's not at like the earliest stages, but he's not at a stage where it's like not treatable either. It's like kind of like a couple steps above the earliest stage.
Okay.
So
All right. Other needs that you all know of in the larger community? I'm sure there's some. I'm not remembering them right now.
I talked to my sister on the way here, and she was telling me that my grandmother is not doing well, and like the last few times she's talked to her, she's been like very out of it and slurring her words a lot and very confused. And she's very elderly, and she's gone through a lot of medical issues. Like she was in a car accident that she shouldn't have ever survived, and like so she's in pain constantly. So they're always like messing around with medications and stuff like that. So just pray that, you know, if there's something there that,
Yeah, we'll
because she
pray.
was really worried because,
This is your grandmother?
yeah.
All right. Well, let's pray. God in heaven, we're grateful for you and for each other, grateful for our church. Lord, we lift up these requests that we know about to you. Pray, Lord, that you would act in those ways that only you can, healing the sick and comforting the sorrowful and providing for the needy. Even now, Lord, we pray that your Spirit would rest upon us in a fresh way, give us eyes to see and ears to hear, fill us with gratitude for who you are and what you're doing for each other, fill us for compassion for the world, fill us with courage so that we can respond faithfully to your call. Fill us with joy, to strength for the journey. Fill us with hope so that our imaginations might expand to receive the coming kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, I know that at the very least, Mikkel is on the live stream, and he set everything up. Like when I came in, it was dark, but he had said, do ABC, and all the lights will come on, and the sound will come on, and the video will be there, and there's a remote control to hold on to, and you push this button. And so, I'm not very technically savvy, and so to be able to come in and have just an ABC, and for me to push this, and it's going to play, and we're going to watch it, I don't know, it's pretty cool. So.
The books of 1st and 2nd Chronicles. While they're two separate books in our Bibles, that division is not original. Due to scroll length, the book was divided in two, but it was written as one book with one coherent storyline. Now, in our English Bibles, Chronicles comes after the books of Samuel and Kings, and most of Chronicles is actually repeat content from those books. And so most modern readers, when they come to Chronicles, they think, wait a minute, I just read all of this, and so they skip it. And that's a shame, because this book is really unique and important in the Bible. In the traditional Jewish ordering of the Bible, Chronicles is actually the last book, because it summarizes all of the Jewish scriptures. The first word in the book is Adam, the first character at the beginning of the story, and then the last paragraph announces the return of Israel from exile. Now, we don't know who wrote this book, but we can tell from details within it, it was produced by somebody who lived a couple hundred years after the Israelites returned from the Babylonian exile. Now, for this author, Jerusalem and the temple were rebuilt some time ago, and as we learned from Ezra and Nehemiah, things were not going well. The great prophetic hope was that the city and the temple would be rebuilt, that God would come to live among his people, the Messianic king would come, and all the nations would come live under his peaceful rule, and none of that has happened. And so the author of Chronicles has reshaped these stories of David and Solomon and the kings of the past in order to provide a message of hope for the future. And we'll see that he's designed this book to emphasize two clear themes. First, the hope of the coming Messianic king, and second, the hope for a new temple. Let's just dive in, and you'll see these themes all over the book. First Chronicles begins with 9 chapters of genealogies, long lists of names. And you'll read these and think that this is kind of boring, and that may be true for you, but actually they're very, very important. The author is summarizing here the whole storyline of the Old Testament by naming all of the key characters in the stories. And as he does so, he shapes the genealogies to emphasize 2 key lineages. First is a line of the promised Messianic king. So lots of space is dedicated to tracing the line of Judah that led all the way to King David, to whom the Messianic promise was given. And then from David, the author traces that line up into his own day. The other family line that receives lots of attention here is that of the priesthood, the descendants of Aaron, who, of course, served in the temple. And so right from the start, you can see the 2 main themes. The author's hope of the Messiah coming to build a new temple, and it's rooted in these ancient genealogies. Now after that, the author moves into the stories about David, and most of these are going to be familiar to you from the book of Samuel, but again, there's some really important differences. So first of all, the author leaves out all of the negative stories about David, where he's portrayed as weak or immoral. So Saul chasing David around the desert and persecuting him, the story of David's adultery with Bathsheba and then murdering her husband, all of that is gone. And what's left are the stories that portray David as a good guy. And not only that, there's also new additional material that you won't find in the book of Samuel that shows David in a very positive light. So there's a large block of chapters where David makes preparations for the temple. He arranges resources and builders and Levites and choirs. And not only that, the author also portrays David as a Moses-like figure. God gives David plans for building the temple just as he gave plans to Moses for building the tabernacle. So why all this new material about David? The author's not trying to hide David's flaws. He knows that anybody can go read about them in the book of Samuel. Rather, he's trying to portray David as the ideal king in order to make him an image or a type of the future Messiah from the line of David. It's very similar to how Jeremiah or Ezekiel spoke of the coming Messiah as a new David. This is most clear in how the author retells the story of God's covenant promise to David in 1 Chronicles 17. When you compare this story with its parallel in 2 Samuel 7, you'll see that the author of Chronicles is highlighting that neither David, nor Solomon, nor any of the kings from his line were the Messianic king, and that when the Messiah does come, he will be a king like David. And so for this author, these stories about David from the past are what sustain his hope for the future. After David dies, we move into 2 Chronicles, which focuses on the kings that lived in Jerusalem. And again, there's lots of overlap with 1st and 2nd Kings, but there are many key differences. So the author has left out all of the stories about the kings of northern Israel, so he can just focus on the line of David. And there's lots of new material about these kings from David's line. He highlights the kings that were obedient to God, and he adds new stories about how their obedience led to success and God's blessing. But he also adds new stories about kings who were unfaithful to God. They didn't follow the Torah, they led Israel to worship idols, and these kings faced horrible consequences, all leading up to Israel's exile, a mess of their own making. And so this whole section becomes a series of character studies where the author wants later generations of Israelites to learn from their family history and so become faithful to their God and the Torah. Now the book's conclusion is really unique too. At the very end of the book, the king of the Persians is named Cyrus, and he tells the Israelites that they can go back home, return from exile, rebuild the city and the temple. And he says, last line of the book, "Whoever there is among you, of all his people, may the Lord his God be with him, and let him go up." And that's how the book ends, with an incomplete sentence. Now, of course, the author knows about the first return from exile and the stories of Ezra and Nehemiah, but clearly in his view, the prophetic hopes of Israel were not fulfilled in those events. And so this incomplete ending shows that the author's hope is set on yet another return from exile, when the Messiah will finally come to rebuild the temple and restore God's people. And so the book of Chronicles, the final book of the Jewish scriptures, it ends by pointing forward. It calls God's people to look back in order to look ahead, because the past has become the source of hope for the future. So Chronicles concludes the Old Testament as a story in search of an ending. And that's what this book is all about.
Nice. I mean, just that.
Cheers.
Cheers. Yeah. Just that fact alone, that the story basically ends with an ellipsis, like, brilliant. Like, just brilliance. Like when I was growing up, this is, before the time of VCRs and certainly before the time of multiple streaming services where you just watch anything anytime you wanted. Like, we had to watch The Wizard of Oz the night it came out. We had to watch Rudolph the night it came out. Like, you couldn't just access all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And so when you had episodes and they were to be continued, I mean, that was a real cliffhanger. Like, what happens if next week we're not, we can't be there. We don't get to see the end. So there are two books in the Bible that end with a question. Jonah ends with a question, and so does Lamentations, which is interesting because they're both dealing with the Assyrians who were so destructive to Israel. I think the fact that they ended in a question speak to the reality that they don't know how to respond to how negative things were. Like, that's how it ends. Jonah's like, what about all the cows? And Lamentations is, I know, that's how it ends. That's the last line. And so much cattle. So the fact that Chronicles ends with, what, did you look it up?
I did. Should I not care about the great city of Nineveh, which has more than 120,000 people, who cannot distinguish between their right and their left, as well as many animals?
Yeah. You got all the cattle. So there you go. So I just love that. I love the fact that, and it's great on their part, the Bible Project folks, to take note of it, that it actually ends with an incomplete sentence. That, I think, is hope. Huh?
As they said that, it reminded me of that scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where they're reading, in the castle, He's like, he must have died while writing it. Like,
Yeah.
if he died while writing it, he wouldn't bother to say, or to write, he would have just said it.
Yeah.
Like, it kind of reminds me of that scene.
Yeah.
That's at the end of the whole movie where they just.
Oh yeah, that also ended with just them getting hauled off in a police cruiser, but that's it.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just love that sense of an unfinished story.
See, some of these translations added an extra word to it to throw a period behind it. Because it says, whoever among you of his people may go up, and may the Lord his God be with him.
Yeah, kind of.
I don't like that.
Trying to round it off a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're uncomfortable with unfinished text.
Well, it's like if you're in a group and you go bum, 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 everybody gets uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. They want
You
that
don't
last
finish it.
bump.
Yeah, thanks for that.
You're welcome.
Deeply uncomfortable.
It's even more interesting though,
Well-
the fact that it's the last book of the Hebrew scriptures and ends openly. So like it would be, even if it was, as a standalone, it's interesting that it ends openly, but like the last book of their text and ends openly is even like kind of more mysterious.
And fitting, because of like of what to come, you know?
Yeah, something's to come, like the promise is yet unfulfilled.
Why did we reorder it?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so in the Hebrew got translated into Greek, and it has a different order too. So it starts with Genesis and it ends with Daniel. And not just our story of Daniel, but there's a couple additional Daniel stories that also made it into the translation version. The Hebrew canon does start with Genesis and ends with Chronicles. I mean, one thing that strikes me about that is the Greek Bible, the New Testament, all the canons we have start with Matthew, and Matthew starts with a genealogy. So if you're reading from the Hebrew to the Greek, it ends with a bunch of genealogies, and then it starts with a genealogy. So that same, hey, we know who we are by looking back to see where we came from, which is how Chronicles seems to work, is exactly how Matthew then starts. So there's some continuity there, but I mean, part of the challenge is the whole concept of an authoritative list didn't really take shape later until we had the technology of a book where everything would be enclosed in one thing. So when you just have a lot of scrolls, who's to say what scrolls are in and what scrolls are out, and who's to say what order the scrolls should be in? So part of the reasons this is last is because it was chronologically last. Like it was written, what did they say? A couple hundred years after the exile?
But also we organize our Old Testament scriptures more by theme than we do by chronology.
Yeah, so there's the law, then there's history, then there's poetry, then there's prophets. But even within those sections, the sections are somewhat chronological, right? So the prophets start with the earlier ones, you work toward the later ones. The history starts with the early, works to later. I don't know, poetry, it doesn't really work for that one.
But then, like, if you look at, like, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, have they always been the first 5 books? Because, like, some, it matters a lot, right?
Yeah, so that order has always been consistent. As the oldest copies as we've ever had, they've always been in that order. Yeah, I mean, I think it is interesting to think about it being in a different order. And it's also interesting, to Mike's point, that not only does this book kind of end with an ellipsis, but if you think of this book being the last book of the Old Testament and it ending with an ellipsis. So I guess for us as a Christian reading it, we know there's something more to come because the Messiah does come. But it's still, even if you weren't Christian, it fits the expectation because there's hope for a new king and a new temple, and at the time that this has been being written, they don't have yet that king and they don't have yet that temple.
Would it maybe fit though that if it's kind of a chronicling or a telling of the history and the genealogy of the people, I mean, the assumption is the person who's writing it 200 years after the exile, or you know, however many hundred years after the exile, they won't be the last one of the tribes. There will be more Jews that follow them.
Yeah.
So you can't really put a bookend on a genealogy because it will continue as long as people continue to procreate.
And we want it to continue,
Yeah.
right? In other words, if we're God's people and we believe that God's blessed our ancestors and us, we want God to also bless our children and our grandchildren. So our hope is that the nation will continue. The hope is that the people will continue, right? The hope is that God will continue to be the God of this people group. Yeah, man, I love that. I mean, it is, I think, beautifully sustaining to think that we're not the last generation in this storyline. There's a popular church planting group called Acts 29. So the book of Acts has 28 chapters. This is not an endorsement of Acts 29. It's not a condemnation of them, but it's not an endorsement of them. But just to the point of the title of the group, there is a sense in which we believe that we are part of the people of God, that the same God that they pray to is the same God we pray to. That this story that they're a part of is part of the story that we are a part of. We are just further, we're part of that ... right? We're part of the continued story. One of those dots was Jesus, and another dot was the church, and then the third dot was Oasis. Well, maybe we need a few more dots, but there is this sense that this, for us, this isn't just ancient history, or it's not just fairy tale story. This is part of who we are, right? Our prayers, our songs, our gatherings, our practices are part of this ongoing fulfillment of the story. What did you make of the fact that David is told, the stories of David are so positive versus the Samuel version? Did that sit well with you, or did that sit oddly or discomforting with you?
Well, I think that they were right, and that you could go back and, if you're reading it well enough, you already know the stories. But if you're trying to compare the side of David, probably don't want to think you're going to have this big flawed guy coming. So, like.
Right. Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, it's not like they were totally void of negative stories. But man, the stories that get told of the kings, like, to their point, it focuses more on Judah than on the United Kingdom or on Israel, the Northern Kingdom. And then the telling of it is such that there are good kings and there are bad kings, but what makes a good king and a bad king isn't what was the economy like during the kingdom, or what was the military like during the kingdom, or what was the geography like? You know, did we expand our borders? Like, none of the things that you would typically measure good kings by, like it was a time of wealth, it was a time of prosperity, it was a time of food, it was a time of expansion. That's not what measured it. It's there was a revival. Check, good king. They worshipped other gods or whatever, a bad king. It's like whoever's writing this story, like we said, we're not sure who wrote it, or we know about when they wrote it, but whoever's writing it's definitely kind of in the, I don't know, the priestly role. Like the last person to get their hands on the text were the ones that said, look, here's how we measure the quality of a king. And it's the quality of the king is measured by their faithfulness to God and not by other things.
So when history kind of looks back at David and continues to prop him up as the greatest king that Israel had, like that still kind of echoes into the modern day, you know, the review of the scriptures, that David was kind of the ultimate example, had failures, but you know was the best of the ones that they had. It almost makes you wonder if that's part of that reason, because like if you want to set up there were good and there were bad, you'll tell a little bit of both stories. But if you want to tell the best, you kind of make sure you elevate them by leaving out the crappy parts and really emphasizing, because yeah, you want the bad parts, go read Samuel. But we're going to tell you how great he was, because we want to kind of point out that he, you know, as far as what we've documented so far, he was the ultimate, the best. And so we'll only really kind of make sure that stands head and shoulders above everybody else in the way that we tell the story.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we haven't gotten to the Gospels yet, but, I mean, the Gospels aren't void of comparing Jesus to David. Like in the genealogy, it says, this is the son of Abraham, the son of David. So that means he's a true Jew, and he's a true king. And elsewhere, like blind Bartimaeus, you know that story? He yells out and calls Jesus son of David. Son of David, would you help me? Which is kind of an appeal to his royal messiahhood. But it is an odd embrace that the New Testament has of that. Like, they want to make it clear enough that, yeah, Jesus is the one who had been promised, but they also want us to draw a pretty stark contrast to say, he's not just some descendant of David. He's more than. And so you get all of this kind of divine Son of God language and this eschatological Son of Man language that gets used a lot. That I think differentiates, at the very least, it's differentiating between who Jesus is and who they expect the Son of David Messiah to be. Because they seem to be wanting the political, religious, military champion. And instead they get this, you know, miracle working rabbi on a donkey. Who's like, love your enemy, don't judge, turn the other cheek. Like, what's that guy talking about? When are we going to kill some Romans? You know? When are we going to conquer the world? So there is a rub. On the one hand, like the two passages, it's 2 Samuel 7 and it's 1 Chronicles 17, which kind of retells that story. I mean, at some, almost, not every point, but almost at every point, it, you know, 1 Chronicles covers the time of 1 and 2 Samuel, and 2 Chronicles covers the time of 1 and 2 Kings. And there are some new stuff in Chronicles, but most of it is repeat, or at least retelling. But 2 Samuel 7 and 1 Chronicles 17 is that whole David wants to build a house for God, and God says, no, I'm going to build a house for you, and the house that I'm going to build for you is your descendant, whom I will raise up and make the King of Kings, like the King for all time. And that, you know, languages, that raise up languages could be translated resurrect. Right? The early church was drawing lines between those texts and Jesus. Here's the Son of David that God raised up, right? And it's his kingdom that shall have no end. It's that kind of hope realized, not just hope deferred.
So if it's primarily a retelling of the previous scriptures of Samuel and the Kings, what was the reason behind needing to retell it? Was it really just the want to kind of provide a book review of the ones that, you know, had been previously read, or was it a scenario where, you know, having returned from the exile, they may have had access, the person who wrote it had access to the scrolls and the scriptures at one point, but had been separated from those and was trying to effectively rewrite down oral history at that point, so that it was documented.
I think it's more the latter than the former. Certainly, I think that the biggest catalyst or impetus to have Chronicles is the exile. So we have the story of Samuel and Kings, but that ought to have led to the established kingdom of God and the blessings of the Lord, right? But instead, it turned out to be a tragedy, right? It ended in failure, right? It ended in exile. One Old Testament scholar says, because you know, Kings is like Chronicles and like Samuel. It was all on one scroll. It wasn't split up into two. And he said Kings, probably should have been titled with a question mark at the end, like Kings? Because it's not a story of success, it's a story of failure, right? Because it starts, Kings, First Kings and Second, right? Starts with Solomon, and it's a united kingdom, and they have all this wealth, and they build the temple, and, you know, it's good times. And then Solomon dies, and the kingdom divides, and then those two kingdoms limp along for a while, and they worship other gods, and then they get punished, and then they have a revival. But then finally, a foreign country comes and destroys Israel, the larger half. And then Judah, little Judah, just kind of limps along for a bit. It's got a little revival, but then they also are unfaithful to God. And the Babylonians come and destroy them. And the last few Jews who weren't carried away into Babylon decide, maybe we'll just go back to Egypt. And so they kidnap the prophet Jeremiah and end up back in Egypt. So the whole story started with the Exodus, which is deliverance from Egypt. And then the story comes to what seems to be an end with the place being destroyed and the last few free folk deciding, well, I guess we'll just go back to Egypt now.
Like, they were told to never go back there.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's a horrible, that's a tragedy. Like you need a sequel or some kind of post-credit scene to tell you that, you know, there's more to the story, which I think is, in a way, Chronicles does that, right? It is, I don't know if it's best considered like a sequel or like a remake, if we're using the film metaphor. Like we had the original version of the story, now we get this remake. But in the remake, it ends with an ellipsis to tell us that there's going to be a sequel to the remake.
Kind of like to reinstill the hope in people, like.
Exactly. That's exactly what's happening.
There's
Yeah.
a movie coming out after that.
Huh?
It's the multiverse is the next iteration.
Right. That comes out next week, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so excited.
So, yeah. I mean, we've been thinking about that multiverse. That's kind of a cool idea. Doctor Strange, then the 3 Spider-Men, and now...
Whoa, spoilers. Come on, I'm just kidding.
all that's already happened.
No, I was-
For those of you online.
But then
Spoilers.
3 Spider-Man, what?
Wanda, or whoever, what's her name?
Scarlet Witch.
The Scarlet Witch? Yeah. It's in the preview.
Yeah, that's not
Okay.
That's
I'm
not
sure you could do some allusions to Jesus and all that, and God knowing multiple timelines.
All right, there you go. It's in there. But there is a way, in all seriousness, there's a way in which, the way in which we tell our superhero stories is an expression of both our hope and our despair, right? That I think our religion is also telling a story that speaks to those same base emotions. And with all, I mean, I'll go see the movie too. I'll enjoy it. But we don't want to put our hope in Doctor Strange. But I think we do want to put our hope in Jesus and the kingdom, right? Like this is a story, like that we get those other stories because they are speaking to an actual need that we have, right? We need some sense of, you know, things can get better. And interesting, you know, Cyrus, so Chronicles is not the first to mention Cyrus, right? He's mentioned in Isaiah earlier. We haven't gotten to Isaiah in our Bible study, but chronologically he's mentioned there. And he's mentioned as the Lord's anointed. Like he is a form of a messianic figure, a deliverer. And yet he's the one who says, whatever he says,
Up.
Yeah, up.
Mhm.
You can go up.
Yeah.
The oldest, I mean, Chronicles is not the only book in the Bible to end with an incomplete sentence. Our oldest copies of Mark do the same thing. It's like the 3 women who had been at the cross Now, I think it's two of them are on the way to the tomb, and they see an angel, and he says, well, what is this for? It ends with a word that never ends a sentence. It ends with for. For? For what? For like,
Never
say
understood
something,
the-
for something.
With a preposition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It ends with like a conjunction, except there's nothing else for it to conjoin with.
That's like ending the sentence with but.
Yes, it's like ending the sentence with but.
Mhm.
But,
Yeah, exactly.
much the same way, I think it invites us as the readers to then go and tell the story of the resurrection. Like I think Chronicles invites the readers to go and live out the hope of the coming king and the coming temple. That's what the incompleteness does. So go.
And so you just did the same thing. You said so, and then stopped.
Yeah. So live. I mean, preaching to the choir, folks who come out on Wednesday night to Bible study.
This is as far as I go.
This is as far as I go. What's next?
It's interesting that you pointed out kind of our obsession with the superhero story and the echo in scripture on kind of the telling of the dismal and alongside the hopeful. But like a lot of the stories that we have, and I run the risk of triggering this for you by saying Revelation,
All right.
as well as the Exile story in general, like it really, both of those accounts end up with it's really gonna suck first. Like it's about to get bad. It's gonna be bad a while, and it will get better, but it's gonna be bad. So, get ready for it, prepare for it. You're gonna be here a while. Settle down, buy a house, have some kids.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna be in the middle of this for a bit. And so, like that, it's interesting to me that it's kind of the opposite. Like there's always the struggle in the movies, but there's just that hope that they'll overcome. But at the same time, the Bible always seems to set it up with more of a dismal setup.
Yeah, certainly I think the prophets do that, and I think Revelation does that. But Chronicles not as much. I mean, maybe this is the odd person out here, because they've already come out of the exile, right? They're now living back in the land. And granted, they've been back a long time. Like, is it supposed to be better at this? Like, where's the king we were waiting for? And where's the temple that was supposed to be built? So there's this sense in which the timing again is not what they anticipated, but they are actually post-apocalyptic. Like the apocalyptic event would have been the exile. And this is the generation or two or three later that has, all of that has been survived. And now they're just waiting and waiting and waiting.
Tangent, but imagine you were in some little city, little town, and you didn't have access to a lot, and all you had was Ecclesiastes. That would not be fun.
Yeah,
Like, at least Chronicles a little bit
yeah,
boring, but at least it had something good in it.
yeah.
It's
It's
written by
got
the
some
optimists in
hope.
the
It's
group.
got some hope.
Well, we
Right.
know which week
It's not
Amy's
just
gonna
like
skip.
everything's vanity. What's that, Mike?
We know which week Amy's gonna skip.
Oh,
Ecclesiastes.
Everything's for the wind.
Yeah, it's all vanity, 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 vanity. Yeah, so yeah, it's better than that. It's good to have these texts, and to catch a sense of their hopefulness, their anticipation. Like don't give up and look forward.
Their optimism.
Yeah, there's a lot of optimism here. Yeah.
I think, like you said, I think you need that, because even as like a person that just like nowadays reading, like when if it's all doom and gloom and failure, you're like, well, what's I need something to show that there's gonna be something that's good comes out of this. So
Yeah, I mean, I have one friend who's a pastor, and he's like, I'm going to be preaching at their church soon, and I told him the text I was going to preach on, and he said he was going to read this passage from the gospel first, and I'm like, well, that's not the passage I'm preaching on. He goes, yeah, but we like to always read a little bit of the gospel each Sunday. And I'm like, I like that. That's a good practice. Like, because we have these other texts that can get a little dark, but it's good to hear the gospel. It's like, no matter what else we might sing or pray or say in a church service, we know that before we leave, we're going to be invited to the table, which is an up event, right? It's a celebration. Christ is here. You're forgiven. You're blessed. Like, whatever else might be going on, the presence of Christ kind of redeems it all.
It's the up, dot, dot, dot.
I wonder if that
It
helps.
is the up, dot, dot, dot.
Yeah,
I
that's
wonder-
one of your series coming up.
Yeah, but just name it.
Yeah, it'll just be up, dot, dot, dot.
I wonder if it probably, like, if it's that long after, and if, you know, the group maybe is separating a little bit and they were trying to kind of bring them back together.
Mhm.
Like, this is what we believe, this is who we came from, this is where we're going. Stick with us a little bit longer.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, there's a sense of, like, certainly they could have scattered. I mean, they had been scattered. Yet they remained a definable group of people, right? They were living. There were some that were still living in Babylon. There were some still living in Egypt. There were some living up in what we now call Europe. Yet they still all remembered Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? They remembered who they were. They remembered who they were from, where they were from.
This is just one good scroll to kind of keep with.
Yeah, yeah,
Kind of like Deuteronomy Part 2.
yeah. Which is funny because Deuteronomy's already.
Yeah, literally Part 2, but
Part
like
2.
just that whole concept of a summary,
Yeah,
again, to remind everyone before the next change in life.
it's why I think we should more often share our stories with one another. It's good for us to know each other and share our stories. Full stop. But one of the reasons it is good for us to do it is it retells the story of God's faithfulness, and we get to hear again us, right, telling how God has been faithful, and we get to hear how God has also been faithful in someone else. So, like, literally, our sharing of our stories is yet again like an Acts 29 or a dot dot dot. It's a continuation of stories just like this, right? We had it tough. God was with us.
Yeah, I think it's easy to look at, that part of the Old Testament and be like, God, y'all are a bunch of idiots, because like God flat out told you, I will take care of you, my will be done, I'm going to bring a king, everything's going to be great. Sorry. I was talking for the mic so Mikhail could hear me.
Know where your hand comes.
Yeah. Don't beat your wife. So it's easy to see, like, how could you be so stupid? And then, like, I look at mistakes in my life and I'm like, how could you be so stupid? It's like, oh, okay, well, maybe even though we know the end,
I know what
Still.
I should do and don't do it, and I know what I shouldn't do and do it.
But I know God is faithful, and if I don't leave, it's going to work out.
right, we'll be redeemed.
Yeah, I think, like, when I grew up, the old preachers would say, the reason you get tested is to have a testimony. They like to play off the words, right? But there's such a truth to that. Like, in church settings where we don't share our stories, or in church settings where we only share our victories, kind of like in social media, right? One of the problems with social media is everybody's just posting the best things. Like, we don't post the average things. Well, the kid got a C today, yay, that's great. Or we lost again today, no one posts the strikeout. And so when we don't acknowledge that part of life, we start to get this skewed sense of what life is like. But what's beautiful about these texts is that they don't do that. Even this happier version of David still included, right, flaws of these other kings.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. So are you kind of equating the Chronicles telling of David then to a social media post about
Mhm.
David?
Maybe a little.
And,
Yeah.
and do you think that that's cheapening it in the long run as a result?
Yeah. But again, we've already seen those other posts.
True.
Yeah,
Hanging out on the roof later.
that's right.
Oh, jeez.
We know his flaws.
Post an apology video on YouTube.
Right.
One of those tacky apology videos.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
But this could always be worse. You could be one of the kings of the north, and then they just don't even talk about you at all.
They just cut you out of the story.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens in divorce often, right? That part of the family gets lost. And in some ways, I really think that the division of the kingdom, when the United Kingdom divided into North and South, it was a bit like a divorce. There was a big group and a small group. The big group kept the name, the small group had to take a new name. Right, so they were Israel when they were together. When they divided, the big group still called themselves Israel. Even though there was still a group left. The small group had to go by a new name. They went by Judah. I mean, to me, that just sounds so much like a divorce. And then who gets the kids, right?
Whoever gets paid the most. Some situations, like whoever's in it, who wants the most money.
And the northern kingdom had the money,
Yeah.
right? But the southern kingdom had the temple, right? So they were the faithful ones. So the kids went to church, right, with mom.
So the north got the truck and the south got the house.
Yeah. Need a better divorce attorney.
No.
Yeah, I mean,
It's like a bad country music song.
Like a
no, I'm
deal.
saying
Yeah, but then
the
as soon as you try to
metaphor
tell
is,
them different,
it
they
kind
kill
of
you.
plays
Right,
out
exactly.
Yeah.
a good bit, right? So one of the visions that you get out of the prophets is of a reunited Israel. That which had been divorced gets brought back together. The stick that was broken gets mended. That's Ezekiel. The kingdom that got scattered gets brought back, and when it gets brought back, it's even more inclusive. It's not just the tribes that got lost. It's new people get to come. So that, again, somehow, God's not just restoring what's been lost, He's making it even better.
Which, if you compare that to divorce, it would take an act of God to restore that, because most of the time it's so broken that there's no way.
Yeah, although I have seen it happen.
Yeah.
We've had folks that we went to church with, they were married and then they got divorced, and then years later they got remarried to each other again.
You have patience with that, right?
Oh, I have patience with all kinds of fun stories. I have one who married the twin brother after divorcing the one brother. But yeah, a lot of them do. I think it's because of the stressors of life. Like they got divorced at the problem times, the low times, but then
Sure.
once life got easier, they remembered why they liked each other. But it is nice though, because I get to see and talk to 1,000 elderly a day. Like, and some are newlyweds because their person passed away and they're 85 and they're getting married again and the whole bit. But a lot of them have married like 60-some years. And I'm looking at that guy and I'm like, I don't know how you did it. He's so annoying. Like, he's like super sorry. They're all, crotchety and annoying, but they do, and they love each other. They've made it through. I find that in church too. That's why we got to be here, because it's not divorce central, like it's reminding you that you can get through things, and that even your marriage is kind of like your testimony. Like, this is my life and this is what I'm getting through. God's doing it with me. Stop. But it is. I mean, it is true. It is a reminder. It is a reminder.
And I think that's how the texts work too.
Yeah. I do look at some of these people and the lives they've lived, because I like to talk to them when I have time, and some of them have lived extraordinary lives. Like, I had a woman who was a spy for the British Army in World War II, and they're all here in Dingpole County. Like,
That's cool.
it is really neat. but it does help you to put it in perspective, because, you know, I think they probably, they had to come through a lot to be together 60-some years, and in different times, you know, so.
Yeah, so Angela and I will be married 32 years this June. I
And
hope-
you're still raising young kids, which is kind of not.
I know, that's just because we just keep getting new ones. But my hope is to make it 60 years. That'd be great.
Well, you guys were just babies when you got married, so.
Still, another 28 years.
Long time.
Next year is 17, but it doesn't feel like 17.
No, it feels like eternity.
I'm gonna hate you.
Because he can't imagine his life without
Thank
it.
you, Robbie.
There you go.
I appreciate
Good
it.
save.
See, exactly. That was sweet.
He's the husband that she was just talking about, like, in the doctor's office.
I am absolutely proud to admit that I am that husband who thinks he's funny, even though maybe some of the times he's not.
Just an anecdote, probably said, hey, anything bothering you on your skin today besides him? I get that like 15 times. Anything bothering you today besides him?
Besides him.
Yeah, I get it so often. I
Yes,
think they all
besides
think they're
him. We
being
mean
clever.
like physically on your skin.
Yeah, exactly. It's really, it has so many different people say the same thing.
That's pretty good though. I'm sure I might use it.
There are some jokes that just have to be used. Like when you sit there in front of an empty plate at a restaurant, and you tell the waitress, clearly I didn't like it. Those
It
kind
was
of things.
terrible.
Didn't like it.
And then my dad goes a step further and he's like, did you hear that they just passed a law where tipping is illegal? Come on, Dad. Just,
Wait,
That
what?
is-
yeah, he tells that to waitresses all the time.
Oh, so, okay.
I think
He
that's
thinks he's being
funny.
clever.
Yeah. Or goes into Burger King and is like, can I have a Big Mac? What, you don't have a Big Mac?
Sad has the worst ideas.
Goes into McDonald's and asks for a Whopper.
I actually did see a lady in front of us in the drive-through at McDonald's order onion rings, and she was serious.
She thought they had them.
Yeah.
No, I get it.
It's not Sonic.
We get them confused. All right, live streamers, if you're still with us,
Sorry for the delay.
the Lord bless you.
Again.
See you next week. Been good to be with you. We will, what's after Chronicles?
Ezra.
Ezra, Nehemiah, that's fun.
I know some of the Bible.
I know some of that.
All right, God bless.
First and second hesitation.